In 2002, President George W. Bush defined the war on terror.
States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world.
While the bankruptcy of Enron was the largest in the history of corporate America. In Hollywood, Oscar history was made with Halle Berry becoming the first Black woman to win Best Actress.
It's not really about me as much as it's about so many other women of color.
Spielberg delivered twin hits with Minority Report and Catch Me If You Can, while zombies learned to sprint in Danny Boyle's terrifying 28 Days Later.
In 2002, with the release of Spider-Man, our dreams finally came true. We finally got to see the comic book movie we've been dying to see.
Heard that Sam Raimi was directing it, and I thought, that's an interesting choice. Then I heard Tobey Maguire was going to be Spider-Man. I thought, wow, that's not a usual choice. So I thought, this is interesting.
This was the movie where Peter Parker could be a weirdo. Like, Tobey Maguire is playing a very strange person, and becoming Spider-Man gives him an unearned confidence as Peter, which is hysterical, even though it wasn't supposed to be.
Tobey Maguire looks ridiculous as a teenager, though, in this movie. He looks like a full adult. But Tobey is so great at the same time. He really was one of the most perfect Peter Parkers because he just has such a innocent face. He's got such a wholesome, aw shucks personality that I really think is one of the best superhero castings since Superman.
Hey, you have blue eyes. I didn't notice without your glasses. You just get contacts?
The real amazing performance to me in this is Norman Osborn, is Willem Dafoe. There's no moment in this where I don't believe Willem Dafoe would do that. You know, it feels like he's almost playing himself. I think my favorite scene in the whole movie is Thanksgiving, where Aunt May brings over the stuffing and he takes a little bite of it and she slaps his hand and she's not now. And he looks at her with the most murderous intent as he's like licking his fingers. Without Willem Dafoe, this is a very different, much weaker movie, I think.
Kirsten Dunst is, I think, one of the best actors of our generation, truly. I don't know how anyone can resist the kiss scene, you know? That's like such an iconic moment, and I think she sells it because Spider-Man's in a mask most of the time. She's not wearing a mask any part of the movie. And she has to bring it with her full face, acting against someone who's in a mask. And I think that that's pretty remarkable.
So Spider-Man, I guess, is the original sin, right? It's like, you know, we're living in the universe created by Spider-Man, and it's so unfortunate because Spider-Man was actually a great movie. I don't think the cynicism that structures our current movie industry, the cynicism in terms of like, let's just churn out one comic book movie after another with all this cookie cutter style, like that wasn't there when it came to Spider-Man.
What's funny when you revisit it is how much it doesn't look like the movies that now live in those franchises. It's zany, it's zippy, it's weird, it's kinetic, it's bright, it looks beautiful and cartoonish. Looks like an old Adam West episode of Batman, right? Like, it both launches these things, but is also shows you how differently they could have gone if stylistic choices like Sam Raimi's were allowed to prevail.
So when people ask me what's my favorite Marvel superhero movie, I don't say, Guardians of the Galaxy, I don't say Iron Man, I say Blade 2.
Blade is a film franchise that doesn't get the respect it deserves. Blade 2 takes everything we loved about the first one and just expands upon it. And it came out just at the precipice where the world was finally opening themselves up, that superhero movies weren't just for kids, they weren't just mindless popcorn flicks.
This movie just is a comic book on screen. It might even be my favorite Guillermo del Toro film. And I think it's just because like every minute of this film oozes with like incredible art direction. I love the janky CGI special effects. There's that moment where they're fighting in front of the lights. They fully look CGI at this point, but I don't care. It becomes like a live action anime. I think it looks so cool.
Blade 2 also really represents Guillermo del Toro's return to Hollywood. He had a really horrible time making the film Mimic. It was really taken away from him by Harvey Weinstein. They used a lot of footage that he didn't want to use. He really disowned it. At the time, they were kind of curious about making comic book movies, but there weren't a lot of directors who cared about movies like that. And Guillermo del Toro loved horror, loved comics. David Goyer, the screenwriter, said that it was hard to find a director who could even talk comics. And when he met Guillermo, he was delighted because you could just bring up an old comic book issue and he'd know exactly what you meant.
The scene in Blade 2 where we see our crew for the very first time is just so fun. This is one of the best assembled crews of any comic book film adaptation. You have Donnie Yen, who also choreographed the film. You have Ron Perlman, and of course, Blade, as played by Wesley Snipes, at the head of all of this.
From now on, we work as a unit. You've been taking orders from me.
The bummer of Blade 2 is that Guillermo del Toro has never made a movie as fun as that. Blade 2 to him almost felt like, you know, this may be the last movie I ever get to make. I'm gonna do everything that I wanna do. And since then, he's almost trying to build the legacy. Like, oh, this movie has to follow this movie, it has to hit certain points. It's weird for me to say that Guillermo del Toro made a giant monster movie, and it's not as fun as the sequel to Blade. But that's the truth.
2002 was a huge year for the genre of the zombie film. You had Resident Evil come out, but that was an adaptation of an existing video game. The film that really revitalized zombies for the decade to come was 28 Days Later.
It's a film that's credited with reigniting the zombie subgenre, even though the rage-infected cannibals within the film are not actually zombies. Whereas Romero's zombies brought their social satire and slow, shambling moves, Danny Boyle's fast bio-zombies here reflect the changing nature of consumerism. Everything travels more quickly in the modern context, from information to infection.
I don't think people can deny how visceral it was and how striking some of that early imagery too, where they've cleared the streets of London. And that was kind of a popular thing to do at the time. I feel like a selling point to movies was like, how effectively can we clear the streets? I don't think another sort of apocalypse or outbreak film that has not used that opening sequence as an inspiration or jumping off point of how they want to start their story. I mean, from Walking Dead to Resident Evil, so many filmmakers have kind of gone to that well.
You have moments in the middle where it reminds us of our humanity. You see Jim bonding with this essentially makeshift family that he and Selena are now a part of. And you get to see them out in nature with the horses, and him being reminded that human bonding is important to keep our sanity, to keep us whole.
Shortly after this film came out, there was a review in the medical journal, the Lancet Infectious Diseases. And that journal article pointed out that this wasn't a very believable depiction of how infectious disease spreads. But honestly, that is not what 28 Days Later was about. It was about the effects on civilization that isolation and fearing for the end of the world brings.
With the Academy Awards in 2002, you saw a lot of repetition. People like Meryl Streep and Jack Nicholson both broke records for getting the most nominations ever. But you also saw a kind of interesting thing, which was the first musical to win Best Picture since the 1960s.
It would have been a real challenge for Rob Marshall to make Chicago in 2002 because the genre of the film musical was basically dead. It would have also been difficult because the bar was set so high by director and choreographer Bob Fosse for his other films. Fosse had first developed Chicago in the 1980s. It was meant to star Goldie Hawn and Liza Minnelli, but his untimely death prevented the further development of the film.
Everyone in Hollywood wanted to play Velma and Roxy. Everyone wanted to do it. And the big reason why Catherine Zeta-Jones is perfect for this is not only can she sing, but man, can she dance. And she can dance so well that she deliberately asked for the bobbed hair so that you could tell she wasn't using a double. Her hair was never in her face.
I think something else Chicago does that it should get a lot of credit for is it's fairly effortlessly diverse. Its cast includes people like Lucy Liu and Maya. It never really comments on it. And of course, it's a wonderful showcase for Queen Latifah. I think it's also pretty notable for somebody who is, you know, sort of in that glass closet situation. This is a role where she's fully embracing a queer female character.
The one number in Marshall Chicago that I think is really clever,
I bet you want to know why I shot the bastard.
shut up, Tommy, is when Richard Gere, as the lawyer who's been hired to get Roxy Hart out of jail, he marionettes her and puppeteers her at a press conference in a song called They Both Reached for the Gun, which is a terrifically well-written song and would work probably however you stage it. But there is something quite funny about Zellweger as this life-size marionette.
In the film, they made the choice to see it from Roxy's point of view, and Roxy, as somebody who is obsessed with vaudeville, sees all of her different experiences as musical numbers. I think that framing device sort of elevates it out of sort of the campy genre of musical theater into being a real character piece that is about Roxy, about being a woman in this time. And I think that's kind of what made it as popular as it was and as critically acclaimed.
Panic Room is a film that David Fincher took on because he had such an epic experience making Fight Club that he's like, I just want to make something small and simple and contained. And then he ended up spending almost 2.5 years of his life filming this movie. And it's something I don't know if the casual movie watcher would see how much effort actually went into this film. But if you really look at it, you're like, this is a masterpiece. This is beautifully constructed and as tight as it gets for one of these closed door mystery kind of movies.
The movie is compared to Hitchcock, and quite rightly. Not just because it has aspects of Rear Window, not just because it has slightly Hitchcockian plot textures, but because in terms of using the camera and using the frame to generate suspense, that's where Fincher starts punching in that particular weight class.
The original casting for Panic Room had Nicole Kidman in the lead role, and then she famously dropped out and was replaced by Jodie Foster. And in doing so, they rewrote a lot of the character. They made her a little bit more intelligent, a little bit more commanding. They kind of gave her more to do in the movie rather than just kind of be the victim of this. And I think what is really great about this script is that everything the characters do, you can't help but feel like, yeah, that's the best option. That is the smartest thing that they could do.
All right, drink lots of water. You dropped to the low 40s. That means we just gotta get your blood sugar back up. Can you hear me okay?
Mom, I'm just a little dizzy, not deaf.
Oh, great, smart ass, that's excellent.
One of the standout performances of this is, of course, Kristen Stewart. Watching her slowly devolve as she's having a diabetic attack, it's really an incredible performance. A lot of older adults would have had difficulty not overplaying, and she plays it extremely subtly. And her bond with Jodie Foster makes them feel like actual mother and daughter in the role.
It also gives us, on the other hand, villains that are so fun to root against, just because watching Jodie Foster set fire to Jared Leto is one of the most invigorating scenes I think you're gonna get in a movie.
Ow! Ah! What? Talk to him.
It's just so fun to watch them get what they deserve, and I think a real testament to both, the film and its screenwriting and also casting, that you just have people that you want to see get lit on fire, and then the film delivers, and that's why it's great.
Why is the Bourne Identity as great as it is? I've parsed this many times to myself because it's a great freaking movie. The director and the screenwriter, Doug Liman and Tony Gilroy, came from independent film. So I think they had a kind of indie sensibility, which means what? It means that they cared about the characters and they cared about a lucidity to the movie that we don't often get with a spy movie.
The greatest moment in the Bourne Identity is that scene on the park bench.
I don't have any papers. I lost meine Papiere. Ich habe sie verloren.
Genug. Stehen Sie jetzt auf.
Ich muss schlafen.
Los, hoch.
Jason Bourne gets rousted by a couple of Euro cops and beats the crap out of them while looking apologetic. Because Matt Damon is this perfect all-American little fellow who, he's in shape, but he doesn't look like he can fight. And the whole point of that character is that he is a blank slate. He's trying to be a good person, but he doesn't know about all the horrors he's already committed and all the terrible things he's done, and the things he's capable of doing keep coming out of him. And Damon playing the vulnerability of that and the essential, corn-fed American, I'm sorry, I broke your face. He's so good at it that you cannot help but root for him.
Universal was very upset when they first saw this film. They didn't like the slower sequences. They didn't like the buildup of the Bourne Identity. And they were particularly perturbed by the cornfield shootout scene. They thought it was too slow, but Doug Liman and Matt Damon really fought for it, and I think it's the scene that really defines the Bourne Identity as a new, fresh take on the action film.
The whole Bourne franchise is the thing that made the James Bond franchise have to reboot. On the one hand, you have James Bond as this brash womanizer spy who's all well-dressed and cocky and stuff, and you got Jason Bourne, who is this humble, apologetic spy who is ashamed of his own history, basically, and he's navigating this world that the US has kind of polluted. This is the period where Arnold Schwarzenegger's on his way out. I think he just shot The Sixth Day. Bourne was the only thing we had as a down-to-earth, gritty action movie.
Fubar is kind of a perfect Canadian film because it actually starts with an apology that they tricked everybody in the film to thinking it was a documentary. It stands out from movies like Borat, even though it was improvised with these characters and real people reacting, partially because the characters are meant to be fools and the real people are smart and kind of reacting to these idiots.
When we look at these two characters, we're like, oh yeah, these guys are clearly over the top. If you grew up in Calgary, these guys are not over the top, and that's why they were able to film with actual people, not even cluing in that they were part of a fictional film, and these two guys were improvisers playing characters. Those people exist, and that's what they look like.
They make this film off of no money. They have about $10,000, tons of borrowed equipment, and they even convinced one of their parents to remortgage their house just to make this film. And it's not just a success, it is a colossal success. It premieres at the Sundance Film Festival. It is a cult smash hit, and it even turns into a franchise that includes a sequel and a series and a game.
So FUBAR is a military acronym that stands for F***ed Up Beyond All Repair, which I think really tells you what the central concept of the film is. It's looking at two men that from the outside, everyone thinks are F***ed up beyond all repair. But what the movie does really well is show you that they're not.
Diener and Terry are more than just caricatures. They're really relatable on a human level. There's a really incredible scene in FUBAR where Diener, who is about to lose one of his testicles to cancer, is just having a moment where he's having a hard time dealing with this. And so what does he do? He goes out, he gets drunk, and in the middle of a storm just starts yelling at the world about all of his ills. And who hasn't been there? Who hasn't just wanted to like yell at the world because you're really upset at something?
It's really a comedy about how dumb people deal with emotions. And it's also kind of, you know, this Baroque idea of these guys who you think of as idiots might be right. You know, they don't really change, but you kind of come around to their way of thinking.
As far back as I can remember, I've been waiting for a Brazilian riff on Goodfellas. That's actually the best thing about City of God, is that Fernando Moraes is constantly nodding to the history of foundational American crime cinema, but specifically the Scorsese films, that he's riffing on in this story.
The opening of City of God really puts you in the center of the favela, and it's all kind of from the perspective of a chicken. It's a remarkable opening to a film that's going to be this sweeping and this violent.
Mas na cidade de Deus, se correr o bicho pega, e se ficar o bicho come.
What we love in Scorsese, you see in Morales. A fast-paced, locked and loaded style. Quick pans, quick edits, a fantasy world and yet a hyper-real world, and then a very gritty one at the same time.
City of God did very well at the Oscars, and it represents this growing in esteem of Brazilian cinema. There was a lot more interest now in Brazilian cinema internationally. It had a pretty significant industry, but now it was coming more to North America.
I remember being in college and everybody was trading the City of God DVD because the style that was present was so in your face and was something that was different than the kind of MTV style that a lot of action and blockbuster movies were doing, that it made it really special.
The biggest breakout for me in City of God is the actor and musician Sue George. This is someone who would appear very shortly after this film in The Life Aquatic. He's someone whose music really kind of hit the map because of City of God, and his performance as Knockout Ned is pretty phenomenal.
O que você tem na cabeça, moleque? Você tá vendo que você tá fazendo bobagem com a sua vida, cara? Andando com aquele maníaco, aquele tarado lá, pra cima e pra baixo, um montão de cara armado. Você tá maluco, rapaz?
City of God is partially a response to the massive rise in drug dealing and violence in Rio in the 1980s. Somebody died of a gunshot about every 30 minutes in Rio, but the policing was all focused on the favelas, and they were considered still fairly mysterious even in Brazil, so it felt important to represent the reality of the people of the favelas.
When I heard there was a film coming out about Frida Kahlo, I was really excited. Everyone knows Frida Kahlo from those graphic prints, and she's one of the most commercialized artists out there. But I think the film by Julie Taymor really shows her journey from being an exuberant, dynamic young woman to the artist that she became.
I really admire her courage in this time and in a country like Mexico, which is very repressive of women, to not ever be affected by anything in the outside, but to constantly be in this internal journey and never apologize for being who she was.
Salma Hayek had been working on the story of Frida Kahlo for a long time, and she was a really caring producer throughout. It was developed for about 7 years, but she really struggled to find a director. When she finally met Julie Taymor, she actually said that they sat and talked for about 4 hours, and just immediately she understood that this film required a woman director, and that also Julie Taymor came kind of ready-made with an extreme interest in Mexican art and folklore and culture that she probably couldn't find in another American director.
Very early on in the film, we see the infamous bus accident that severely injured Frida Kahlo. And the way Julie Taymor directs this sequence, you know that this is not a straightforward biopic. This is something remarkable and very ahead of its time.
Over and over, you see Taymor returning to tragedy and beauty intermingling. You see gold and birds, and it's beautiful. That's kind of a way of sublimating Frida's ideology into the visuals of the film.
I feel that Frida is one of the most nuanced biopics on an artist ever made in Hollywood history. It really employs the kind of visual techniques that Frida Kahlo used in her paintings in the film form. It's a film that really set the mold for how 21st century biopics on artists could be.
One of the interesting films of 2002 that I think too many people forget about is Todd Haynes' Far From Heaven. This sort of return to Douglas Sirk melodrama that I think was both a very unique film and also helped people turn back to a different era of film and reconsider its impact.
Far From Heaven is a beautiful movie. Visually, it's arresting. This is a film that deals with homophobia, internalized and externalized. It deals with racism, and it just deals with sort of this like mistaken idea that the American dream is going to solve everything, and that if you do everything right, that you're going to be happy.
I think in some ways Far From Heaven's one of the most accomplished movies that comes out in 2002, and it features some really wonderful performances, including what probably should have been an Oscar-winning performance for Dennis Quaid as the Julianne Moore character's closeted husband, who is the one who breaks that spell with that bit of profanity. And even now I can remember how that felt in the theater hearing that. It's really quite startling.
I know it's a sickness because it makes me feel despicable. I promise you, Dr. Bowman, I'm going to beat this thing.
Green is such an important color in Far From Heaven. Todd Haynes really uses it to indicate something that's forbidden, something that's dangerous. We see green in the gay bar scene with Dennis Quaid. We see green upon the first date between Kathy's character and Raymond's character in the tavern. In other sequences, blue is used to indicate the failing nature of the marriage between Kathy and Frank. And then these golden hues are really used to indicate this sort of burgeoning love between Raymond and Kathy's character.
As a queer filmmaker, I think Haynes is really interested in, both in Carol and this film, a real beauty and a real mourning for the world that is lost When you do come out, when you live your truth, you do destroy this beautiful lie. And that, I think, is what this movie is about, is how beautiful was that lie.
Steven Spielberg says that in the early 2000s, he was in his 50s, he'd just gotten off of AI, where he was kind of remembering his friend Stanley Kubrick, and he said that what he wanted to do was really rediscover his style, find a new way into his artistry. And to do so, he hitched his wagon to two of the biggest stars of Hollywood and their passion projects. Catch Me If You Can is part of a sort of comeback year for Leonardo DiCaprio. He hadn't had a lot of films after Titanic, only The Beach and a few other minor films, but he had always wanted to make Catch Me If You Can. He had read the book, he knew DreamWorks had the rights, and he'd worked with them for a long time to make this movie. This is also kind of his final teen role. Beyond here, he's really acting in more adult films.
He was the perfect person to play this character because you really had to believe that this kid was charming enough that he could walk into any room, smile at you, and you'd give him what he wants.
Welcome to Miami Mutual Bank. How may I help you?
My name is Frank Taylor. I'm a co-pilot for Pan Am. I'd like to cash this check here, and then I'd like to take you out for a steak dinner.
And he does play this really great mix of youth and charm that kind of, you can really imagine yourself getting swindled by him and kind of going, well, I mean, can you blame me?
That scene where he walks through the airport and the stewardesses all gather around him and Leo's in his uniform, his Pan Am uniform. If you're not with this movie by the end of that walk, you are never gonna get it, because that's what it's all about. It's all about that kind of glamour, that sizzle, that thing that was nostalgic even while it was happening. So like, as we're walking down every step he takes, he's aware that this isn't really real and this isn't really happening, but how great would it be if it was real?
The thing about Catch Me If You Can is I don't think it's as celebrated as so many of Spielberg's other movies. Like, I think it's one that just lingers. There's something just so sensitive and tender about that movie, about how Spielberg shapes this child's growing up. And I think we probably know more about this now after you've seen The Fabelmans and you know more about Spielberg's relationship to his own parents, and you see him looking at this child who is on the run because of his broken home. The thing about Catch Me If You Can is, on the surface, it's this movie about a con artist, but really it's just about a boy searching for home.
Minority Report is a really fun sci-fi movie. It is a exciting dystopian future that you're kind of really compelled to lean into and believe, because it's not that far off from where we're at.
Spielberg is a master of world building. He can build a universe for you where you are fully immersed in every little detail, from the air to the light to the ground, the rain. Nothing is arbitrary. And then it's a really cool looking science fiction film.
Minority Report is also the first collaboration between Steven Spielberg and Tom Cruise, who are two people who had been trying to work together for a very long time. Spielberg was actually supposed to direct Rain Man, but had to drop out. They had a bunch of different projects that never came together, and in the end, it was Tom Cruise sending Steven Spielberg this script, which really got him excited.
Why are you gonna get arrested when you haven't even committed the crime? Let's explore that, whatever, who cares? At the end of the day, it's Tom getting chased by cops. So he's running the whole time, and our favorite thing about Tom is running. We love running Tom, and the whole movie is him running from the police.
We live, in a lot of ways, in the future that this movie imagines, and yet the future this movie imagines is the shittiest Elon Musk future, right? Like, it's just like, what if the whole world looked like a Tesla? It's hideous.
Minority Report puts the audience in this very uncomfortable position. Would you rather a world where there is no violent crime, or would you rather a world where there is no free will? What is the role of government in a democracy? What is the role of police in a democracy? How much autonomy does the police and the government have when it relies on technology that can be manipulated?
Why'd you catch that? Because it was gonna fall. You're certain? Yeah, but it didn't fall. You caught it. The fact that you prevented it from happening doesn't change the fact that it was going to happen.
You have this ability to predict and stop crimes, and nobody at any point is like, what if a social worker was there? Like, what if you showed up and were just like, hey, you were about to hurt somebody. Let's unpack that. Let's do something about that. Instead, it's just this violence that is immediately applied to the situation. And the only future this world can imagine is like, what if you just kept funding cops, right? Like, in many ways, its inability to imagine is the horror of this dystopia. It can't figure out a better way.
Adaptation comes from the mind of writer Charlie Kaufman, and a Charlie Kaufman script is never about just one thing. It's always about multiple layers, multiple things going on. But most importantly, a Charlie Kaufman script is usually about the mind of a tortured artist. In this case, the tortured artist is Charlie Kaufman himself.
The script I'm starting, it's about flowers. Oh. Nobody's ever done a movie about flowers before. So there are no guidelines.
What about Flowers for Algernon?
Well, that's not about flowers.
Oh, okay.
And it's not a movie.
Sorry, I never saw it.
2 Nicolas Cages is actually better than 1, partially because Spike Jonze is using it as an excuse to interrogate why we love Nicolas Cage. Like, it's such an interesting story, and none of this was in the book, of course, because it's an adaptation of Susan Orlean's The Orchid Thief, which also factors into the movie, but Charlie Kaufman decides he's going to write it from the perspective of himself trying to crack this book.
After this point in his career, Nicolas Cage was predominantly an action star, and it's interesting here to see him fully dive into the characters of Charles and Donald. In this film, Nicolas Cage embraces his hairline for the first time. He embraces his middle age. And he really leaned into Spike Jonze and Charlie Kaufman leading him in his performance. He had his own style of acting, but he really believed in them, and it led to an Academy Award nomination for this role.
I think Meryl Streep, to me, is the standout of the film. Meryl does such a great job at embodying this character who is sort of finding herself through finding this story.
I think that even though in 2002 Brian Cox was already a kind of recognizable character actor, he'd been in stuff by Wes Anderson, I think that now that he's become this icon on Succession, it's pretty funny to go back to Adaptation and watch him play Robert McKee as the voice of reason.
If you can't find that stuff in life, then you, my friend, don't know crap about life. And why the are you wasting my 2 precious hours with your movie?
You've been following Charlie this whole time, but towards the end, Donald, the kind of goofier twin, takes over. You're realizing that this movie that you're watching is sort of falling apart in front of you, but you're totally delighted by it. To have your cake and eat it too is kind of rare in an art movie experience.
I think Punch Drunk Love might actually be my favorite Paul Thomas Anderson movie. It's the one that feels the most. It's the one that hurts the most. Before he became a technician and fell into these difficult people narratives, he told one that was a difficult people narrative, but from the inside.
He really wanted to challenge himself and make a 90-minute film. So he created this character of Barry Egan that was loosely based on a true story about a man who had collected over 1 million air miles by buying Healthy Choice pudding.
It's kind of this wonderful bridge in Paul Thomas Anderson's career, because I think this is the point where all of a sudden Paul Thomas Anderson was really turning into a serious filmmaker. He's controlling his craft and he's focusing on the characters, and he's not trying to go big. He's trying to tell a movie that is just as weird as his main character.
What he made the choice to do, which is brilliant, I think the reason that this won Best Director at Cannes that year, he really tethered the camera to his character's emotions. At the beginning of the movie, you'll notice the camera whips all over the place. It's going up and down. And that's because Barry Egan is barely hanging on to his sanity, and he is in a world of uncomfortability.
There's times where Punch Drunk Love feels sort of like a music video, and I think that that's because John Bryan had written a lot of the score in advance. They were able to play the score on set, so people were able to act and react to the music. There's that kind of interplay in the actual performances.
There's a line that Barry Egan tells his brother-in-law, played by Robert Schmeigel, after he's had a very rage-fueled outburst.
What exactly is wrong? I don't know if there is anything wrong because I don't know how other people are.
And I think that really gets to the heart of all of our anxiety, that we don't know how other people react. We don't know how they love. We don't know how they hate. This is what Barry Egan is most terrified of.
PTA is a fan of Sandler just like we are. And what is it that he loves most about Adam Sandler but his rage? And like any great thespian, one must have the great rage. And this is what it's about. It's just basically about his bad temper and how he freaks out and how he meets a girl and falls in love and gets punch drunk loved, right? So, but at the end of the day, I don't got nothing for end of the day. Yeah, I just put that in.